Vibe check.
In the last video, we tore the front end of the truck down to make the installation of some new parts easier, and one of those parts, which we will be installing in this video, are these brand new Belltech shocks. While this truck needs new suspension anyway, the fact that we are going to potentially be tripling the horsepower that this vehicle produces makes it even more important to have a functioning suspension system. So let's get started by removing the old front shock absorbers first. We'll remove the two bolts that hold the bottom of the shock in, and then come up top to devise a unconventional solution for rusty nuts. After attempting to loosen the nut for the length of an entire time lapse, using nothing but a box end wrench and vice grip, it was time to get out the angle grinder. With the bolt loosened, it will be easier to get the angle grinder on the shock stud. With the other side being far worse, we'll just go ahead and grind that nut off altogether. With the factory shocks removed, we can now prepare the new shocks for installation. And to do that, we're going to have to cut down the bottom brackets to fit within the lower control arm, since these shocks are designed to fit a number of different vehicles. And as illustrated on screen, the brackets for the factory S10 shocks are much smaller. To make the bottom bracket fit, we'll just take an angle grinder and cut the sides of the bracket down. And this doesn't have to be perfect, so just cutting the very ends off should be sufficient. Also, in order to make this shock fit without taking the entire suspension assembly apart, we are going to remove this dust cover, which does not fit through the bottom of the lower control arm. With the shock properly positioned, we can install all of the hardware and do the same for the other side. Now let's do shock test 2 electric boogaloo and see what kind of results we got. And it looks like compared to our original test, there is at least a little bit of improvement in suspension stiffness. Obviously this isn't the most scientific test or visualization, but it definitely felt stiffer while jumping up and down on it. For the rear suspension, I had the great idea of drawing a scale on the side of the truck to help visualize how much stiffer the suspension is actually getting. And again, not the most scientific idea, but it is a little bit more so. To my surprise, the rear suspension was actually far easier to work on, as the nuts and studs had minimal rust and came off with relative ease. On the rear suspension, there is a nut and stud at the bottom and two nuts at the top. The nice thing about the rear mounting points is we will not have to modify any of the brackets on the shock. However, working quarters are close and somewhat crusty, so using less than ideal tools will create quite the frustration. But in the end, it is certainly not impossible. Compared to the front, I found that the rear had far better improvements, and I think this is because currently there's no engine up front, so the whole suspension geometry is incorrect to begin with. So I'm getting a little bit better at this whole being scientific thing, and I did this clever overlay with the before and after videos. And while I can't get every single jump perfectly in sync, you can definitely see an improvement in suspension stiffness. At the lowest point, we see roughly an inch in improvement. But again, this isn't a machine-administered test, so it's really hard to get an exact metric, but based on this, there is definitely some improvement. And with that improvement, we are one step closer to getting this truck back on the road. Well guys, that's the video. Thanks for watching. If you've liked any part of this build so far, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe so that you can get updates on this project as we keep working on it. We also got a few other projects, so head on over to the channel to check those out. And we'll see you in the next video.